Welcome to ICRT video series. Our guest today is Professor György Schöpflin, member of the European Parliament. Welcome, Mr. Schöpflin.
Thank you.
We have just heard a great presentation on our Borderless Europe conference about the prospects of the European Union. Could you give a brief summary of your presentation?
A very brief summary is that, to my mind, borderlessness is normative, that we should be aware of the actual reality of countless borders and boundaries and division lines in Europe, and that we'll really be able to tackle these if we are aware of them. At the same time, the European integration project, to my mind, is in difficulty, it's struggling, above all, but many other reasons, because it's a pre-globalization institution and it hasn't really come to terms with the impact of globalization. So I'm fairly pessimistic about there being a European presence in the world, Europe as a global player. I think we've lost that moment if we ever had it. And as for the integration project, maybe we're at a turning point. It's difficult to see a turning point when you're in the middle of it. But I think that with the rise of Eurosceptic, anti-European, Euro-neutral or integration-neutral forces, especially in the EU 15, we're looking at something that Europe has never had to look at before. For example, I'll tell you one example, in the European Parliament it is quite possible that next year's elections will produce a blocking minority, which effectively will paralyse the European Union, as Parliament has to approve budgets. With 3/5 majority, what happens if Parliament can't approve budgets? I don't know, but the possibility is real, and I think we should be confronting it. And I think what we should more seriously be confronting is, what is the basis of this, I'll call it Euroscepticism? Why? Above all, because the European elites, I think, have become detached from society. They don't seem to be able to find solutions to the 5-year economic crisis. They're not finding solutions, especially to rising unemployment for young people. I think it's Spain where the unemployment is 25% and that of young people is 50%. I think this isn't tolerable. It means that the relationship between generations, the betrayal of generations, so on, is acute. And the European Union, I think, neither is nor is capable of creating the impression that it's doing something. Above all, because it's something that is so very technical, very difficult to transmit in intelligible ways, the entire banking situation, so on and so forth. So, I mean, I recognize that there are real structural problems as to why the crisis can't be resolved, but equally, I don't think enough of an effort is made to say to people in a non-technical, non-technological language, this is the difficulty, this is the problem, this is why we can't solve it.
And how do you see the role of nations and cultures in the borderless Europe?
When you say nations, are you talking about the cultural dimension of a nation or nation as a state?
Rather a cultural entity.
I think that nations will be there for a very long time. They will not dissolve. They have extraordinary powers of self-reproduction. We can see identity collectives, I'll try and use neutral language, which have been subjected to genocide, mass extermination, mass expulsion. Think about the Bosniaks. They actually had a rather weak identity in Yugoslavia, and now have a much stronger identity, precisely because they were subjected to collective measures, whatever we want to call it. Identity groups hold together, they construct new ways of identifying themselves, new discourses. The question is, to what extent are they prepared to live in a Europe which it superimposes a European identity on them? I think the European identity is very weak at the moment. It's much stronger maybe 20 years ago. To what extent are they prepared to talk to other European national groups. To what extent is Europe prepared to help with the conflict resolution which Europe has always been there to do? If you think about Hungary's position, the general perception is that the European Union has done nothing to help the relationship between Hungary and Slovakia. It just is sorted out between yourselves. And I know that from my own experience with my own constituents that many people up and down Hungary are deeply disappointed by this. And they say, this is not why we joined the European Union. So then the counter-argument was, yes, but we have to have money to do this, that, and the next thing. And you say, well, that's fine, but it has not solved, which I think some people were hoping in 2004, the problem of Trianon. The problem of reunifying the Hungarian language community across the frontiers. It hasn't happened. If anything, in some respects it's got worse. So some people are, I think, quite understandably disappointed with the European Union. I'm not sure which way they're going to vote in next year's election.
As my last question, I'm interested in your very own opinion. Like, where will the borders of the European Union be in 20 years? What really interests me is that what will happen with Ukraine and Turkey.
I always give you my very own opinion.
Right.
Okay, when I arrived in 2004, we knew where Europe ended northwards. Polar bears, North Pole, but Canada was not Europe. Greenland probably was. To the west, United States, not Europe, Ireland is Europe. Iceland, if it wants to be. To the south, we like Morocco, we have an association agreement with Morocco, but Morocco, which I think twice applied for membership, was told, terribly sorry, but you're not a European country. So the Mediterranean is a clear southern boundary. Malta is Europe. When I arrived, there was no clarity about where Europe ended to the east, where non-Europe begins. This is now there. The Eastern Partnership states constitute the easternmost boundary of the Caspian, really. And I do remember being in Kazakhstan maybe 7 years ago, and the Kazakh said to me, sort of slightly slyly, but you know that a part of Kazakhstan is in Europe. And I said, really? Oh, how fascinating. And they said, well, you see, if you draw a line south from the Ural Mountains, the western tip of Kazakhstan is in Europe. I said, it's 20 times the size of Belgium, and an awful lot of the oil and natural gas is there. And I thought, that's terribly interesting. The problem is, you see, that the former capital, Almaty, is in the same longitude as New Delhi. It's too far east to the Europeans. So I think we can safely say that that's where Europe ends. Turkey is an anomaly. Is Turkey a European country? Is Turkey not a European country? It's a political decision, really. On the other hand, not just political. And I think at the end of the day, the problem will be solved by Turkey. My own reading is that Turkey will not want to join the European Union. It wants the best possible deal it can have, which is fine. If you look at the way in which Turkey has since the negotiations began in 2001, absolutely refused to yield an inch on Cyprus. It still does not recognize Cyprus. Can you imagine? Hungary started negotiating, let's call it 1998, and we said, we'll start negotiating with you, but we won't recognize Denmark. Well, it's absurd. But that is really the parallel. Turkey does not recognize a fully fledged member state of the European Union, does not allow Cypriot ships and aircraft onto Turkish territory. So during the Cyprus presidency, Turkey completely ignored the European Union. I mean, come on. So this is not going to happen from that perspective. Yes, I know they're about to look at another chapter, reopen it, or open a chapter, but I think one chapter is sort of closed, technically closed, but not formally closed. So it's a very long way to go. I don't think that Turkey actually really wants the level of invasiveness that Copenhagen criteria need. I have heard stories, mainly the urban legends, that if there were a referendum on EU membership, there were 90% vote against. So I don't know. On top of that, Turkey now has a very clear opening eastwards to southwards. It clearly wants to be a regional player in the Middle East. I don't think so. And my gut feeling tells me that Turkey doesn't really want to be a European state. It wants to be in between, which I guess is fine. The Southeast European states at the Thessaloniki summit 10 years ago were all given a European dimension. So it's very slowly they're sort of moving that way. I deal with Serbia. Serbia has great energy at the moment. The new government that came to power last year is doing all sorts of things that the previous government didn't do. With a bit of luck, Serbia could be a member by 2020. Montenegro probably a little before. Albania some way after. Macedonia might almost have been a member by now, but because of its bizarre problem with the name, the Greeks insist that it's called Fyrom. Everybody else calls it Macedonia. Macedonia has signed bilateral agreements with a number of countries called Macedonia. Hungary is one of them, so I'm quite happy calling it Macedonia. Bosnia, very bad situation. Kosovo, even worse. So that's roughly the state of play. As far as the Eastern Partnership countries are concerned, at the Vilnius summit, probability is that there will be association agreements signed with Moldova, with Georgia, and maybe Ukraine. I say maybe because there's the problem of Yulia Tymoshenko. But I think, at this moment anyway, today on the 25th of October, it looks as if they will do a deal on Tymoshenko and then they can sign an association agreement. That's how it looks.
Thank you very much for the answers and again for the great presentation.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.